Welcome everyone. My name is Rihanna Collier and I'm the Director of the Software Division at SIIA. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar, the Federal Cloud Computing Initiative Update. Before I turn it over to our moderator who will introduce our experts, I want to cover a couple of quick housekeeping items. First, we want to keep the discussion interactive and the panelists definitely welcome your questions. You can ask your questions at any time during the webinar through the chat box at the top left of your screen. Towards the end of the webinar, we will open the phone line to take your questions directly. When instructed, you'll push 14 on your phone to ask a question, and we'll go back over that when the time comes. Next, this webinar is actually a preview of some of the topics you're going to hear at the upcoming CloudGov conference on February 17th. So if you're not already registered, I encourage you to attend. We've got a number of top agencies that will be sharing their thoughts on the cloud initiative. And if you're a government employee, your conference registration is free. Finally, given today's discussion is all about the cloud movement, I quickly want to mention our upcoming All About the Cloud conference in San Francisco this May. Now in its 6th year, this is our largest cloud event. If you're not familiar with the event, I encourage you to visit the website for more details, or please contact someone at SIIA and we'll be delighted to talk you through it. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's webinar, Mike Binko, President and CEO of CloudTrack. I'm happy to turn it over to Mike, who will set the stage for the webinar and introduce our speakers. Mike?
Great. Thank you, Rihanna, and thank you all for joining us. We're excited to walk through the emerging landscape of cloud computing and software as a service, particularly tailored to the government market. Even though the primary initiatives from a cloud-first perspective have been benchmarked by the federal government, we also do plan to touch on some of the non-federal government initiatives and opportunities that are in play on the state, local, and municipal side. We'll introduce the panelists here briefly, and then we have a pre-introduction to the topic by Deniece Peterson, one of the chief analysts at Input, and we'll give some perspective on why cloud computing is here to stay in the government space and some of the key indicators on driving this initiative. Myself, I'm President and CEO of CloudTrack, a company that focuses on compliance in the cloud. We'll have Kevin Jackson joining us. He's an engineering fellow and a quite well-known blogger, tweeter on the topic of cloud in the government space. We have Robert Ames, the Deputy CTO for IBM Federal. They've had some very recent announcements on cloud initiatives that cut across all government sectors. And then we've also invited Nick Hoover, Senior Editor of the government group of InformationWeek magazine, to join us to also weigh in with the perspective of what are the media and journalist community going to be focusing on as this movement towards cloud continues, and some of the initiatives that are involved. So we'll give each of those presenters an opportunity to walk through their company and how they address the cloud space and the government market sector particularly. But in the meantime, I'd like to introduce Deniece Peterson with Input, who's going to walk us through her state of the landscape for cloud computing in the government space. Deniece?
Great. Thank you, Mike. I am the manager of Input's industry analysis group. So what we do on a daily basis is track the spending and policy priorities of the federal IT space. And right now, all indicators are really pointing to cloud computing as the centerpiece of this strategy to modernize federal IT infrastructure. Next slide, please. Now we want to get a peek into how agencies are looking at cloud computing. We've done a number of surveys. This is just a snapshot of one. We talked to federal IT decision makers about the primary drivers and obstacles, the potential impact, the state of their current cloud computing adoption, and what we see is that it's relatively in the early stages, but it is gaining momentum. Most people we talk to realize that it will have a major impact on how they meet IT needs in the future, both in the short and long term. The potential cost savings is a major motivation, but security concerns are the number one issue. It has to be resolved before they can consider broader adoption. And it seems like the Obama administration and industry has heard this message loud and clear. There's 5 indicators that we see that tell us that cloud computing does indeed have staying power. So I'm going to count those down David Letterman style, starting with number 5. So the first is vendor solutions meeting agency demand. So this is really a pull market in many ways in which vendors have to be market leaders in the federal space. It's not really yet a build it and they'll come type environment right now, but the better and more mature the solutions are, the more comfortable agency leadership will be in increasing adoption. Now within the IT market, we see M&A activity in the cloud computing sector, seeing a sharp increase in 2010 with tech heavyweights like SIIA and IBM and other companies leading the charge. Top-tier companies entering and boosting their presence in the cloud computing space is really not a surprise now. This market is slated to be one of the most attractive growth markets for IT firms over the next several years. Also something we're seeing is that IT vendors are starting to collaborate with one another to integrate and converge the components of their IT infrastructure under this concept of unified computing. So it creates a converged IT infrastructure stack or platform. And through those collaborations and partnerships, it can be a pre-built and packaged solution sold to agencies as a physical data center infrastructure in a box, or in the cloud computing paradigm, offered up as a pool of cloud resources to be used whenever they're needed. Number 4, so while security is the #1 concern, standards and portability are next in line. And NIST has a program called SAjak that's attempting to tackle this problem. So the idea with SAjak is that rather than waiting what could be possibly years for formal standards to be developed by consensus, they're conducting use tests to validate the viability of cloud computing against specific requirements and then share those results with agencies and with the public. They're having weekly meetings, collaboration sites. They're really engaging industry to work with them on identifying use cases and developing reference architecture and taxonomy. So cloud vendors really have an opportunity to shape what this looks like. Number 3, so all federal agencies have success models at this point that they can reference for their own implementations. And that scale is ranging from quote-unquote low-risk areas such as email, collaboration, CRM. We're seeing HHS with electronic health records. But with email emerging pretty much with Army, Energy, DHS, Interior, and many, many more. It seems like the low entry point. But it's also going into the more mission-critical area with private clouds like at DISA and NASA. And also GSA has emerged as a central player here with its Cloud BPA and Apps.gov, as well as its own internal implementation plans. OMB's 25-point implementation plan that they released in December to remodel IT management noted that OMB expected more cloud-specific contract vehicles to emerge in the short term. Number 2, it's all around security. So GSA's FedRAMP program. This was established to work with the cloud computing vendors to assess and authorize their systems based on government-wide kind of baseline security requirements. So rather than agencies completing the entire end-to-end certification process themselves, agencies would have the option of leveraging work already completed by FedRAMP and then add any incremental steps needed to address their agency-specific requirements. So GSA is really hoping that this program will eliminate much of the duplication and effort that occurs today around security, as well as provide somewhat of a springboard for agencies to quickly deploy secure cloud services. And lastly, number 1, really this is about OMB shifting the gauge from suggested closer to mandatory. The 25-point implementation plan I mentioned earlier calls for a cloud-first policy, which requires agencies to identify short-term targets for transition into a cloud environment. Now, in addition to that, budget submissions have a little extra work involved because of cloud computing. Moving forward, agencies will be required in a phased approach to conduct cloud computing alternatives analysis on what will eventually be all IT investments at some point. So by tying this initiative to budget approval, OMB really has upped the stakes for agencies that aren't actively pursuing cloud computing projects. Next slide, please. So looking ahead at what we see for 2011 for cloud computing, there are some challenges that have to be overcome. Agencies have been technologically and culturally stovepiped historically, which limits economies of scale, and that is a core benefit of cloud computing. So that may be something that could inhibit the benefits that they see from implementations. There's a tight budgetary environment, so agencies will have some hard decisions to make about where and how to reprogram some IT dollars for this effort. Then there's the cultural barriers that require some hurdling as agencies start to grapple with loss of control of some parts of their IT environments. There's the security issue. Agencies are under much more scrutiny around securing their IT environment, and many of them tell us that they feel like cloud really complicates that issue. So the security answer has to be simple enough that they understand that it doesn't require much more activity than they're already prepared to conduct with some of the new requirements that are coming their way. Licensing, because cloud computing provides a large group of users with on-demand access to a shared pool of resources, conventional licensing agreements could be problematic. So as the cloud model matures, agencies will probably expect vendors to offer more flexible alternatives that save money and help simplify the acquisition process. Now on the vendor side, we're seeing challenges there as well with an expanding pool of competitors. We're seeing both small and large vendors entering the market, or if they're already in it, really starting to expand their presence in the cloud market as federal adoption increases. There's also work to do to overcome some of the hesitation within agencies, as well as just adjust business models to align with the new licensing and other issues that cloud procurement will introduce. But on the flip side, I think there's a great opportunity here as cloud gains momentum. First up, I think we're already seeing it. The low-risk solutions I mentioned earlier around email and collaboration and CRM and case management, but then also private clouds, infrastructure as a service. We anticipate also seeing much more detail around where the government's going within the FY12 budget request that's going to be released hopefully in a couple of weeks. So with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Mike to kick off our discussion about these and other issues that are shaping the cloud market.
Thank you, Deniece. That was quite a comprehensive overview of the key drivers behind cloud. And we're going to use really the summary points of where is cloud computing going, at least in the next 12-month period or the fiscal end calendar year coming up in the next 9 to 12 months as our baseline for the discussion. So with that, I'd like to introduce the panelists, the vendor participants who are going to kind of join me in this roundtable walkthrough, and then our one media representative to tell you a little bit about how they cover the market, where their technologies and perspective lie, and some of the key initiatives that they are driving in the cloud space. So with that, Kevin Jackson, Engineering Fellow with NJVC, one of our more active bloggers and has a book that he's releasing upcoming soon on the cloud's impact in the government space. Kevin, could you walk us through NJVC's perspective on cloud computing and where they lie in the market?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm glad to be here. So NJBC is focused on supporting the intelligence community and DoD specifically and the federal government in general. Our heritage has been in operations and sustainment, O&S. But we see cloud computing as really a game changer in that it allows our customers much more flexibility and agility while reducing their need to focus on O&S. So we see cloud as really the integration of new IT services and being able to provide those IT services to customers. So that's really our focus, how to transition to cloud-managed services that are acceptable and able to support mission needs and requirements.
Right. And Kevin, I know in our pre-conversation you had mentioned that some of the topics you plan to hit here in the discussion are the procurement factors, GSA's movements that Deniece also did point out, also some of the skill set shifts that agency contracting officers and project managers will need to consider as they move into the cloud. So thank you for that. Next up, we have Robert Ames, the Deputy Chief Technology Officer for IBM Federal. Obviously everybody knows the Big Blue brand and their perspective on quality technology platforms for many different industry sectors. And we're fortunate enough to have Robert join us from the federal side and talking about some of the initiatives that IBM has been moving, probably one of the first larger horizontal vendors to really embrace the cloud and come out with some key initiatives in particularly the last 6 to 9 months. Robert, could you walk us through some of the latest?
Sure thing. Thank you. And it is an absolute pleasure to be here and appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. So I'm also speaking to you. It's a rather proud year for IBM this year. It's our 100-year anniversary. And certainly if you look across the 100 years, the change that has come about through IT is just breathtaking. And certainly cloud computing is another wave of that continual stream of innovation that's going to carry us forward. So we view it as absolutely crucial to sustainment and, as Kevin was suggesting, to reduce operational expense as well as capital expense. And we're very eager to provide the means to do that to the government sector. I thought I'd talk quickly about a couple of the initiatives that we have in place that might be of interest. First, I'll just touch on the fact that we did announce just prior to the end of the year our federal community cloud, which is based in a couple of our major hosting data centers. So we really wanted to provide an on-ramp to the government to cloud. The interesting thing about that environment as well is it will, of course, meet all the FISMA requirements, but it's also co-hosted with an environment that is also FISMA high. That is not a cloud environment, but it is a FISMA high environment. And what we see, one of the core tenets you'll see from IBM's messaging is the cloud is going to be a crucial aspect of our IT environments, but it's not going to be the only aspect. And we need to find ways to link cloud to our existing internal applications, to our existing high quality, highly competitive data that we might not necessarily want in the cloud, and we need to find ways to link across them. That's why we find that federal community cloud interesting, the notion of being able to co-locate effectively a cloud environment with a more traditional strategic outsourcing type environment. Secondly, I wanted to talk a little bit about something we also announced at that same time, which I think is reflective of our view that we want to stop talking so much about cloud as the means and really talk about the ends, and what the ends are the business value. And so this is a cloud that we call the Municipal Shared Services Cloud. And the idea of this was to link, to serve the state and local governments that are under tremendous budget pressures, that have had tremendous inefficiencies when they start to try, and each little locality is building their own applications to support their taxpayers and citizens. So what we wanted to do was link everything from the tax department to the public safety in these localities and integrate services. And we wanted to do that once and be able to provide that as a cloud service. So think software as a service, business process as a service for common state and local government type services, and provide that as a service. So no longer do these state and local governments need to be in the business of developing these applications, hosting and building the infrastructure. They can sign on and use this in a cloud type environment. And then finally, just really briefly, another one that we think is really, really important, we're honored to be a part of it with the Air Force, is what is called the MOCA program, or the Mission-Oriented Cloud Architecture. And really what this is an effort on the part of the Air Force to build a bridge between their desire to get to cloud computing architectures for their mission architecture, but there's that chasm that exists between their desire and their existing fears about the security. So they're working with us on a design program here with MOCA to leverage some of the leading technologies that are in play from our research and development organizations, such as stream processing and stream analytics, to provide real-time intelligence of what's going on both outside and inside the cloud, and to use those analytics and those intelligence to make the service management software that deploys all of the virtual instances, that manages how things are actually configured in the environment, to make that service management software smarter and more able to respond to cyber type events. So those are some key initiatives that we're participating in. We've got a lot of things going across the globe, but I really want to yield the floor to others so they can talk, and then we can get more in the discussion later. I thank you for your time.
No problem. Thank you, Robert. That's great perspective on one of the companies that a lot of folks are probably already using that are wondering how they can extend it to the cloud. Just to round out our vendor list, KloudTrack, my company, we focus on what we call Cloud 2.0, which is really taking the next generation of application and business functions to the cloud. As Deniece pointed out, the low-hanging fruit is obviously hosted email, some of the office productivity and contact management apps. We are focusing and concentrating on what we call the human side of compliance. And that's really when individuals are interacting with sensitive data. We want to put an audit trail and transparency behind it, and we want to do it in the cloud to afford the cost savings and economic factors that make it attractive. We cut across several different industry sectors. The government is probably our fastest growing community. We cut our teeth in the financial services sector, handling secure financial information, having to be certified at the SEC and FINRA levels for data management and data center trusted environments. And then healthcare and medical, we have the first cloud platform that was certified under the new SAjak guidelines that allow doctors' offices and even government agencies to access RS stimulus funding if they use a certified platform. So we're excited about that, and then also some efforts in pharmaceutical. With that, I'd like to hand it off to Nick real quick to talk about his approach to the government market as a journalist and a media kind of watchdog, but also someone who weighs in on the timely topics and can even have some influence on the directions that the decision makers go. Nick?
Thanks, Mike. So I'll talk a little bit about what I'm going to be looking at here over the next year or so, and then sort of a general overview of where I see things as they stand today. So obviously one of the first big things that's coming up soon, I believe on Valentine's Day, is the budget release. And so I'm going to be looking at that a little bit to see what some of the cloud projects that are funded there, how OMB talks about cloud as a budget priority. I'm also going to be continuing to look at leading edge deployments, seeing where agencies get into and governments get into things like infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. You're looking at how some deployments that are in place today, like NASA's Nebula Cloud and DIS's Race Cloud, are maturing. I'm also interested to see how the new FedRAMP security procedures, it's sort of a shared CNA procedure, certify cloud services, will mature because there's a question in my mind of support and of maturity of that model. And finally, I'll be looking a lot about infrastructure as a service. I think that's something that's going to come more and more over the next year or so. I'm already starting to see some test and development and cloud bursting deployments within government. So generally what I see in the cloud today, as Deniece from Input said, cloud computing is definitely here to stay. But by the same token, I think there are still some uncertainties as to, even some definitional uncertainties as to, what differentiates, say, a private cloud from a virtualized data center. And there's some questions still I hear about things like security. But by the same token, there have been some big first steps, say in private clouds, and there will continue to be with this big initiative, data center consolidation initiative underway. As I mentioned, I think there's a risk that people build virtualized data centers and just call it a cloud, which I don't believe it really is if it doesn't have cloud-like features like managing pools of resources, on-demand scalability, self-service, et cetera. But I think that another good thing about private clouds is that it should help spur some IT consolidation by and some sort of a consolidation of how IT is managed within agencies by enabling centralized CIO shops to offer more services to their constituents agencies. Next and finally, public clouds. What I'm seeing today are people starting with agencies really starting with email and collaboration. I think that's a pretty clear trend. And there are some other usual SaaS suspects like Salesforce in there as well. I see GSA has tried to take the lead here over the last year or two, but I see them sort of falling behind because as people on the webcast might know, that they had planned to make it easy for agencies to procure cloud services from their website Apps.gov, but after a year of promises, we still have yet to see the infrastructure as a service offerings up there and available on Apps.gov. Finally, in public clouds, as I mentioned earlier, we're starting to see some infrastructure as a service stuff. One of the things that I've noted in my writing is at Lawrence Berkeley National Labs, for example, we're starting to see some pretty widespread use of Amazon's infrastructure as a service offerings. And I think that some of that will spread throughout agencies as people start looking at cloud bursting and start looking at test and dev in the cloud. So, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Nick. And I'll add in addition to Kevin being an active, cottage industry star on the blogging side, Nick is very active as well in tweeting and blogging from a lot of the policy events where these new initiatives have been unveiled. I've bumped into him a couple of times at Vivek and Jeff Zent's presentations. But also, correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, but InformationWeek also is one of the publications, the few IT publications that does really dive into, covering it from a case study perspective. What are some of the gotchas? What are the real ROI factors that decision makers need to keep in mind? And then highlighting some of the successes and, I would imagine some of the failures as we go along.
Absolutely. I think that sums up our coverage well. From a broader perspective, InformationWeek, we're about business technology, and so driving business value into the technology, and by the same token, that's the way that we strive to cover the market, the government market, and we do that through case studies as well as longer features and some analysis back pieces as well, some research back pieces. So.
Sounds great. So with that, let me bring it back to some of the key topics that were brought up in Deniece's main overview and the 5 main points. And Kevin, I'd like to maybe have you weigh in first on a little bit of the procurement hurdles that folks as systems integrators or solutions firms typically will need to keep their eye on or be attentive to as you start building your teams and aligning with team members. I think the teaming aspect of this is one that really bubbles up to the top, because vendors that do have either infrastructure or applications ready to go in the cloud often don't have the procurement vehicles lined up or the contract instruments to go after it, particularly if they are, had a success in another industry sector and then are moving and see a viable opportunity in the cloud space. So maybe if you could give some perspective on how NJVC takes on the teaming scenarios that might be laid out in front of you.
Yeah, I agree. I really think that cloud, because of the change in the procurement mindset with cloud, is going to, bifurcate the marketplace. You're going to have those providers that have a platform that has been certified with other customers, with other federal agencies on it, and those that do not. For instance, I know it's been a while for GSA to certify and get their infrastructure as a service offerings out, but that's a list of 11 teams that I feel may have an advantage essentially in the marketplace, because the agencies have to move fast, and these IaaS platforms will have been certified, and in fact the administration will be pushing agencies to use these platforms. On the other hand, the providers that don't have platforms or are not part of the infrastructure as a service, they will need to team with one of these 11 awardees or somehow work their offerings in with the cloud providers like Google and Amazon that already have federal customers on their infrastructure. The other thing is the procurement shops themselves. They're just not familiar with procuring as a service. And with the speed that's being required by the agencies, I think they're basically, the shops, the individual agency shops may just throw up their hands and say, okay, you just go to GSA. We can't do this. It's too different. There's a lot at stake, and there's a lot of change coming in with respect to procurement.
Right, and if for folks who are on the call that aren't familiar with the IaaS, also known as ICE, that's a blanket purchase agreement contract vehicle that GSA really focused their attention on, and what we would consider the first shoe to drop in the movement towards cloud, particularly at the federal level, is the data center consolidation that I think Robert touched on briefly, and also in Denice's comments. There's 11 vendors. There are folks like Aptis, Carasoft, Clear Government Solutions, and players like that. Some big, some small, some mid-size. So I think one bit of perspective is that we as a vendor that needs to partner with an organization like that, to your point, Kevin, we do see a nice rich variety of players. However, there seems to be a tendency that they're going to want to team with the larger guys that have the footprint and the recognition out there. So, one thought that we had, and we're talking to Vivek and the folks on the CIO councils, and we'll be touching on this at the CloudGov conference on a panel session with agency and department CIOs, is how do you breed innovation in this next move to incorporate cloud with your existing IT environment, and that migration where you manage the stability that's needed and the innovation that's wanted or necessary come together in the solution. So thank you for that perspective, and the teaming approach is going to be critical. Robert, from IBM's perspective, with some of these initiatives and some of these early, not necessarily pilots because they're full deployments from what I understand, but as some of these initial programs get going, can you highlight a little bit of the ROI factors and metrics outside of just IT productivity and cost saving that you guys are focusing on with your customers?
That's a great question. Thank you, Mike. So I was actually going to tack on a comment to the other discussion. I think it's great that we have the infrastructure as a service offering starting to become available. But what I would caution people to consider is, are they really going to be reducing their capital expenses, their capital outlays significantly, just by going from having a bunch of physical applications to having a bunch of virtual applications, right? It strikes me that what I would be focusing on if I sat in the government CIO chair was to spend a good deal of time actually trying to figure out what applications I have out there and what redundancies there exist at the applications and what could be consolidated at an application level before I ever move to the cloud. Now, that has some challenges because the government's trying to move fast, but it strikes me that is a real way to start driving cost out. And the other thing is, going back to thinking about our state and local government municipality cloud, the notion of infrastructure as a service helps a bit. It can reduce your CapEx quite a bit, but your operational expenses, if you're managing all those hundreds of virtual machines, if you're trying to deal with all that complexity, can actually increase. So where we really see the true gain is in shared services, shared platform layers, shared middleware layers, even shared application layers. And that is where I think you're going to start to see if people can rationalize their business processes, if they can rationalize the applications that they need, and they can find out how they can share those things, that's where I think the real gain is going to come. The challenge is going to be balancing that careful consideration and that thoughtful moving forward with the pressure that comes from these memos. Right.
Right. Yeah, great point. I'm going to bounce another topic out here that Deniece hit on and ask maybe Nick to weigh in on this. It's a little bit more of the cultural shift that might need to pre-lead everybody getting comfortable with where the budget savings are going to be. And then Deniece, if you're still on with us and want to chime in, we'd love to hear your perspective on it as well. But this is somebody brought up to me in a kind of a contracting discussion that what typically was squarely in the CIO and IT management camp is now becoming something that CFOs within agencies and departments and operations teams, and if there is a compliance or risk management team, will often have their own budgeted items and their own war chest of funds that they're putting to work themselves. And they may or may not be looking for IT to manage it for them. They might have business analysts on the CFO's side that are doing some things operationally, whether it be HR, accounting, and invoicing and procurement, that they basically, with some of the tools and flexibility that's out there in the cloud, they could take it on their own. That, I don't want to say it's a risk point for the CIO camps and the IT camps that have to kind of have a responsibility across the agency for security, privacy, and performance. But it certainly is something that will be a point that either from a cultural shift change and some perspective from InformationWeek maybe covering how agencies are navigating those waters might be interesting theater as it plays out. So Nick, your thoughts on that as maybe we see the finance, operations, legal, and then IT teams coming together on some of these opportunities?
Yeah, I see. So this is sort of part of a larger trend that we've been covering for the past several years at InformationWeek, even beyond the government. We call it the consumerization of IT, and you can see this in adoption of iPhones. You can see it in the increasing number of the use of laptops and people using their own tools at work. And one of the things that I'm seeing as a trend here is that there are two sort of converging trends. On one side, you have the users themselves who see in their everyday life that they can increasingly use tools to help them organize their everyday lives, whether it's things like Flickr or things like websites where people can buy plane tickets, the websites where you can plot your travel out, personal calendaring websites, and so they say, well, there are some benefits that I could bring into the workplace with these things. I could use Google Calendaring. I could use Google Docs to do collaborative authoring. On the other hand, you've got the CIO shop, and they're seeing hearing about this type of thing being used, and there's a risk that the CIO shop will get left behind by the users in some places. And let's take one example of how this is playing out right now. At the Department of Veterans Affairs, they've recently had to go back and they've actually shut down access to some of these sites because of concerns about security, because these sites have not been vetted by the IT shop, and so there is a clash that's possibly taking place right now over this. I think it's something that's got to get over with. I think that as you see more and more cloud apps become certified, that this will go away. If things like Amazon become certified by, say, FedRAMP and then accepted by agencies, and these bureaus or departments have their own budgets that they want to use outside of IT. One thing that they can always do is say, hey, IT, this is something I'm going to use, and just jump on it almost by that point in time. But I think that there are a few steps between where we are now and where that point is. But I think that's an inevitable point in many ways. I think that there are still some places that the IT shop will be ahead of the game, whether it's some advanced cloud bursting things or some advanced infrastructure as a service things where you might still need some real IT expertise to figure out how to operate. But generally speaking, I think we're going to move more and more towards self-service.
Right. So, Deniece, in your roundtables with the different camps on operations, finance, and the CIOs and IT communities, are you seeing that is it still stovepipes divided, or are you seeing that it's going to be moving more towards, I hate to say it, but cloud by committee, where it's a strategic decision that's going to happen?
Well, it varies, but I think overall the trend has been for a number of years that there has been significant stovepipe activities, and that's kind of one challenge with where the federal government is IT-wise, because the IT needs were separated from the business needs. CIOs weren't at the table with the CFOs and the upper level decision makers creating the direction for an agency. And I think what's happening, if you look at OMB's 25-point plan, DoD released their new IT acquisition framework, and they're pretty similar in the fact that this idea of joint development really has cultural challenges there, because it means that, for example, with DoD, they have an IT acquisition task force where it's not just the tech folks, but it's the CFO, the comptroller, it's the director over test and evaluation, it's people from various major functions DoD-wide. And I think when you have these unique IT environments, and in order to really benefit from cloud computing, you kind of have to drop those walls, and their joint decisions have to be made, and enterprise-wide priorities. I think it makes it really difficult. That's at the high level, and then going down to, the IT field person. We've interviewed people around the data center consolidation initiative, and you've heard the term server huggers. We talked to some server huggers that were literally, my agency's name is stamped on the side of this server. I don't want to give it up. I don't want to consolidate myself out of a job. And this kind of, rice bowl mentality where you have control, and all of a sudden the paradigm shifts, and now people aren't sure how they function individually, and then also how they're supposed to function as an integrated unit, moving the whole government towards this new horizon. So I think that's going to be, like I always say, I'm sure everyone's heard the term, but in many cases, technology is the easy part. It's the people part that can really present the biggest obstacles.
Well put.
And Mike, do you mind if I think I want to get that what she said and add a little bit to it. Is that okay?
Yeah,
that's Nick. Yeah. So I think that I agree with everything that she says, and I want to add that there are a lot of forces moving in the direction of helping to bring to break down some of those silos. The one of them that I see is from an IT angle is these tech stat sessions that Vivek Kundra, the federal CIO, has been hosting recently, where he brings in not only the IT the IT constituencies, but the other constituencies that matter, the business constituencies, the finance constituencies, the actual users into these meetings where he discusses with them, the performance of particular IT projects. I see it definitely in the 25-point plan. I think that there are probably some things that need to be done beyond that. But I just wanted to second that I see some silos being broken down. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't many that remain, but I think that as we move forward, there will be more silos broken down, and I think that that's a good thing for a place like cloud, where there are many of those silos will be represented.
Right. Well, thanks, Nick, for that perspective. And we're also seeing that what typically was more of a tactical goals and objectives mentality for the IT folks, they actually, some of them are realizing, at least the ones who are getting it up front, are realizing that it actually frees them up. If they can outsource a lot of the grunt work that typically was part of their team, and they had a heavy resource load body-wise, doing tactical things out in the field, updating software, making sure that hardware was performing properly, it does free them up to sit at the strategic decision-making level with their peers, the ops and finance and compliance guys. So,
Mike. Yeah, Mike, this is Kevin. That goes back to what I was going to talk about before, this whole skill set shift. You're going from having to do things to having to manage services from multiple sources.
Absolutely. And that kind of, we're coming up on the last 5 to 10 minutes of our prepared remarks before the Q&A. So I'd want to bounce one other topic out for Kevin and Robert and I pretty much to wrangle with a little bit. Last topic was, okay, the decision makers within these agencies and the government side of the equation are going to have to, learn to play better or understand each other's needs a little better. I'd say the last point that I want to kind of hit on amongst us vendors is that the same applies. I mean, cloud is not just breaking cloisters and stovepipes within the government agencies. There's a true interoperability and integration need that any vendor endeavoring to move into the cloud space is going to have to play with other vendors. There's just no way around it. Whether you're linking and integrating to legacy platforms that are already in place, humming along quite nicely, and no one's going away from them because they don't have a depreciation schedule anymore. You've got to be sensitive to that. And then also some of the new innovative approaches on the cloud apps and infrastructure where if you want to play in that space, you're going to have open standards and a capability. Kevin, Robert, if you could touch on that from the NJVC and IBM perspective, that'd be very helpful.
Yeah, so this is Robert. I couldn't agree more, and I'm proud to say that we place and always have placed a huge focus on standards and interoperability at IBM, and even big strong focus around open source as well as a powerful innovation platform that we should harness. So there's no doubt that there's no one answer to cloud. There's no doubt that all of our customers around the world are going to continue to have heterogeneity, whether that be at a grand scale of heterogeneity of clouds or whether it be at a micro scale of heterogeneity of operating systems and applications they run. So the fact that standards are going to be there and going to be vital is no surprise, and it's vital that we all drive to them. I think it's also worth giving a real positive shout-out to NIST, right? I mean, when in the 18-month ago time frame, when everybody was really spending the first half an hour of any dialogue on cloud talking about what cloud was, right, NIST really placed a lot of structure around that dialogue with their discussions and their early releases of the NIST definitions of cloud. And they've taken that on and they've moved it down the track with things like FedRAMP and these other activities such as SAjak. So absolutely endorse it, absolutely think it's critical, and know that we all as a vendor community are working together to ensure that becomes reality.
Right. And Kevin, I know you're very active involved with the SAjak initiatives and the taxonomy approaches on the standardization front through NIST. And I think that's the right place for it to reside at this stage. But I think also the agencies are going to have to work with vendors as they even develop their own pre-solicitation requirement lists and RFIs and even RFPs to say, we need a little bit of a caucus here to determine what are we not thinking about as an agency that we might be impacting if we move to cloud for certain things.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the groups I'm really focused on and supporting is the use case working group, the U.S. government use case working groups, because I see that as the epitome of collaboration between the government and industry, because those use cases are looking at the mission needs and requirements of agencies, which ones can actually be addressed using cloud technologies or techniques. And at the same time, the industry participants are getting ideas about what type of solutions they should come to market with, what type of cloud offerings can directly address the agency missions. And it will also drive, I believe, interoperability, because if you take the use case output of the use case working group and you combine that with the output of the standards working groups, then you will have, I believe, you will drive a robust competition in the marketplace. One organization I work with, the Network Centric Operations Industry Consortium, we focus on interoperability. And while we don't look at technical standards, we look at the implementation of those standards. Because you can have a standard, you can develop something that's compatible with standard, and they just don't work together. But the interoperability is all about implementation. And the use case, and SAjak, and a lot of the activity that NIST are doing really goes to the implementation aspects
Right, and just to highlight a few examples, I think Robert hit on a few areas on where they're doing that for all levels: federal, municipal, on the shared cloud, and then with specific tracks within departments and agencies such as the Air Force and others. We've seen it probably bubble up a little earlier on our radar screen on the state and local side, just because of it's an economic factor versus a technology factor, and they really are stripped for resources. And we had the good fortune. I don't even think Robert knows this, but we did an extension of the IBM Informix database platform into kloudtrack, and then the Informix transaction model was humming along, performing very elegantly for 15 years, and that's a resource that they've paid for time and attention to go. I'm sure IBM would like to upgrade them to the newest version, but the fact is they needed to extend some of their business processes that were utilizing data in that Informix system to do the human side of collaboration and secure transactions. And that's where we were able to extend it out to the cloud. But then we also hand data sets back off to IBM once we're done with it, and the metadata for rich reporting and analytics in other Cognos and WebSphere environments. So those are just some examples. Real quickly, I would like Nick to kind of take us out here on the formal statements with, I know you've hit on a few of these topics already, Nick, but if you had to kind of boil it down to your top three maybe, areas that you're going to focus on, what would you like people to keep an eye on Information Week over the next year?
Yeah, so I think that some of the key things to keep an eye on here are, one, I think, as I mentioned this, infrastructure as a service. I think that's going to be a coming big trend, especially starting with test and development and cloud bursting. But I know that they're starting to see more general uses of technologies like Microsoft Azure and Amazon EC2 out in the private sector market space. And I expect that to start to filter into the federal sector as well. Two, I think we'll see continued private cloud talk, especially as this data center consolidation initiative keeps kicking up, and as we see some more and more mature clouds from people like NASA and the Department of Defense, as their clouds mature, and as even places like the Air Force, has some interesting pilots going on, I believe, with IBM actually. And finally, I think that I'm going to be watching some of the security stuff. I think that the FedRAMP program, if executed properly, big if, has the potential to help accelerate greatly the adoption of cloud services across the federal government. So programs like that, like FedRAMP and the SAjak program and others, which are really focusing on use cases and standards. I'll be watching those as well. So those are my three really.
Great. Well, thank you, Nick. At this point we're kind of bumping up against our hour, but I'd like to ask the operator to come in and open it up for Q&A, and you'll get some instructions on exactly how to do that. That's been on the call, and then we'll do a quick wrap up after we get a little bit through the Q&A.
Certainly, ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to register a question, please press the 1 followed by the 4 on your telephone. You will hear a 3-tone prompt to acknowledge your request. If your question has been answered and you would like to withdraw your registration, please press the 1 followed by the 3. You may also submit a question using the chat feature located in the lower left corner of your screen. As a reminder, ladies and gentlemen, to register a question, it is the 1 followed by the 4 on your telephone.
And while we're waiting for that, I'll just do a little plug now. So keep in mind that the CloudGov conference is coming up on February 17. It's in Washington, D.C. at the Westin, Washington, D.C. Pretty much running all day on the 17th with a little bit of an after reception as well. We're going to have a vendor panel, kind of like we did here with maybe some other folks playing together. We also have a CIO agency, big agency, departments, as well as the small agencies are represented. I'll be moderating that. And then I know many of the vendors that you'll be interested in knowing more about are going to be on site in the exhibit hall. And then SIIA also has All About the Gov, All About the Cloud, another conference in San Francisco later in May and ending part of May. Also, Input is a co-sponsor of the Clear Cloud Gov show coming up in February.
And there are presently no questions on the phone lines at this time.
Okay, well, I hope that means we did a good job of at least touching a lot of topics. But by all means, we will be having a link, and also the whole entire webinar will be available after the fact. I think SIIA will be putting that up on their YouTube site, and we'll also make this deck available for folks if they are interested in following up with any of us as presenters, and Deniece as the analyst introduction. We welcome your questions, your thoughts, your feedback, and we look forward to an active discussion ongoing in cloud and the government space. So thank you everybody for joining us on the panel, as well as the audience out in the aether. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.